r/fantasy's top fantasy books, top 50, but they're lying because they don't do tiebreakers, so it's top 132 fantasy books of all time. Let's go ahead and jump on into it. I'm going to be doing these pretty much every year when r/fantasy releases their top 50, but not 50 because they don't know how to tiebreakers apparently lists. And the reason I am doing this is because I know you guys aren't the hugest fan of me doing list videos. I just like doing them. And it also is just a cool way to get like a pulse on the fantasy community, because it's important to me to see what's popular out there, what's cooking, what are people really loving, because that, tells me what I should be reading. Because if it's popular and apparently really good, I should probably read it and review it because I'll like it, and it might be a good way to engage with the community. That's the justification for me doing this video, and this will take some time. There's 132 books. Don't worry, I will not be going over all of them. That would be insane, and I have nothing to say about most of them because I have not read most of them. I'll be stopping on series I'm familiar with, and there's some really interesting position changes this year, but I'm pretty much going to go ahead and jump way up the list because I'm not super interested in seeing what all these kind of more bottom of the top 50 books have to bring, because I don't plan on reading most of them. I've never heard of most of them, and yeah, that's about enough justification. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Starting off, we have a lot of stuff I've never read. I'm going to go ahead and scroll on past a bunch of it and come to a stop at 115 because I really want someone from the r/fantasy subreddit who has any position or, sway in how this table is done. Why in the world is 1984 on a best fantasy list? I think this is a pretty credible list overall. I think doing this kind of mass crowdsourcing of voting can be a really good kind of flash look at what's going on in the fantasy community. But this is not fantasy. No, it's a dystopian future novel with no fantastical elements, nothing that really goes beyond what basic science could bring. I'm very confused, and I could defend it as maybe sci-fi. I could defend it as dystopian, but fantasy, I can pretty confidently say you are wrong, sir. Next we have Watchmen. I liked Watchmen when I read it. It was good in terms of story and depth. I appreciated the art more than anything else, and I think its very standout art style is a large reason it's held so high among the comic book community. So I can praise it. It's deeper than 90% of comic books out there, and it's certainly more interesting in general. Then there's some stuff I've never heard of. Moving, fast forwarding to things I know. Conan the Barbarian. A lot of people have told me to read this. I will eventually probably pick it up, but nothing anytime soon. Princess Bride, an absolute classic. Seeing it lose 27 points is a bit sad. I'd like to see that stick a little higher, but I get the younger blood coming on in is not gonna keep up these classics that I maybe appreciate a little too much. Because the modern fantasy is pretty much arguably the greatest it's ever been. But we have the first Brandon novel now coming in. We have The Emperor's Soul. I would personally put Elantris below Emperor's Soul and bump up Emperor's Soul a little bit on this list. Pretty much everything Brandon Sanderson puts out is going to make this list because r/fantasy and most fantasy fans in general love this dude, and I would just switch Elantris and Emperor's Soul. But Emperor's Soul did fall quite a bit for this year, so we're probably going to see it fall a little bit more in the future is my prediction. We have The Once and Future King by T.H. White. My father would think that should be a lot higher. Hi, Dad. We have The Legend of Drizzt, R.A. Salvatore. I would put this substantially higher. I think this is probably a popularity issue. While R.A. Salvatore's works are popular and Forgotten Realms are popular in general, they have fallen off quite a bit from the fantasy mainstay. That's why it is still bumped up a little bit. I think it gained 8 points here. But The Legend of Drizzt, at least in the circles I'm involved in, is not getting talked about much within the fantasy zeitgeist. So I hope to see that continue to grow. I'd like to see a plus 50 for next year for Legend of Drizzt. Now we have Neil Gaiman. I've loved everything I've read by that man, so I need to give more stuff a try. Stephen King, The Stand. That's the first Stephen King I've spotted anyway. Now we have, coming up soon, some controversial picks as we approach some things. So here, this is kind of controversial for me. We have Elantris and Warbreaker. Now, I would have been shocked to see Elantris. I was shocked to see Elantris not as Brandon Sanderson's lowest ranked book, but to see it above Warbreaker even is really surprising to me. I'd love to know what some of the justification for that might be, because I just found Warbreaker to be just all around a better character, better plot, better world, just from a reader engagement, not even preferences, just what was presented to me to be better over Elantris by quite the stride. Both of them are bumped up a little bit, I think +2 on each. They got 13 votes apiece each, so that's good for them. Now we have a bunch more stuff I've never heard of and a couple things I've read, but it's been so long I don't feel right talking about them. And then we have, in my opinion, a crazy pick, and something that has recently fallen a lot. I like Brent Weeks. I think Lightbringer is one of the best contemporary fantasy stories being told. Night Angel is overhyped and so overpraised among the fantasy community. I don't get why. If you keep just saying and spraying that it's the greatest series out there, you guys are going to keep disappointing people, because if I had gone on with tampered expectations for Night Angel, I would have probably thought that was good, but people hyped it to be this epic. And I don't think you know what epic fantasy means. By no means is it an epic fantasy. It's a good fantasy story, and if you keep overhyping things, people are going to keep being disappointed by this series. And I think it will continue to fall, because it's certainly for younger readers. If you have some real hindsight goggles on it, you might want to go back and pick it up, because I don't think it stands up to an adult level of criticism. I mean, even Brent Weeks has said it's not his best work. So that's I don't think it's bad. I just don't like how overpraised it continues to be. We got Jim Butcher coming in with Codex Alera, which I plan on picking up if I ever finish Dresden Files. I'm on book 4 now. And we have a bunch more things coming in strong. Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, Good Omens, which I've heard phenomenal things about and want to pick up. Neil Gaiman is actually on this list as much as like Brandon so far. Good for him. C.S. Lewis Narnia. You guys know how I feel about Narnia, but I respect it for the classic it is. I just don't think it's aged as well as many other classics that have aged very well. American Gods. So Neil Gaiman's American Gods, I read the first one, or the main story, I believe it's what it is, within that world that's being built. I'm a little confused there. I've heard conflicting things. Strongly stood out from established fantasy in terms of having a new approach to telling a fantasy story. Neil Gaiman knocked it out of the park here, and I will never not give American Gods and what he's going for there praise, because I love originality, and it's so original. Dark Tower, Stephen King. I really wish I knew why this was so highly praised. I finished 3 books of it, or two books of Dark Tower, and it was good and confusing. I'm going to pick up the 3rd. I'm probably going to keep going after that, because, to be a fantasy booktuber, I should. And I'm going to keep at it. I'm going to keep swinging, hoping it clicks with me, because I do respect it and appreciate it in some levels. And I think it is interesting enough. The Witcher. So this is sitting at a comfortable spot on the list. I would put this substantially higher, as anyone who knows me and my channel here would recognize. I think it's one of the best relationship-driven fantasy stories ever told. I like the writing styles. I wish I could read it in the original translations, but I'm not Polish, and I don't plan on learning Polish. The upcoming adaptations, if it's done well, could see The Witcher fly through the roof in terms of popularity. Same thing for Dark Tower down there. Sorry for Dark Tower fans. Even if I don't like your series, every time a series is adapted poorly, it's sad for the whole fantasy community, because we as a group should demand these stories be given the same level of respect of any genre. And very often it seems like studios go in with this kind of turned up nose expectation of, we'll just shovel it out and the fans will like it. And that happened to you guys, and I apologize. They didn't respect your source material, and after reading the first couple books, I can clearly see that. You have my sympathies, and I'm hoping the Netflix does The Witcher some good here going forward. We have Brent Weeks' Lightbringer, and this is probably the only pick so far where I agree with placement exactly. It belongs about this position on the list. We're entering the top, third of the list, or much higher than that by a good bit, and I think Lightbringer fits there. In terms of plot twists and unique magic systems, solid but not incredible world, Lightbringer brings those things to the table. And those of you who keep peddling Night Angel trilogy for Brent Weeks, please switch over to Lightbringer. It is just his better series, in my opinion. Of course, it's an opinion, and your opinion could be right, my opinion could be right, my opinion's right. But we're gonna move on. Now we have Dune. Now my review of Dune is something that was done a while ago on the channel, and many of my older reviews I've had some regrets with, and I wish I could take things back. Dune is not one of them. It's one of those books where I respected the world building, which was great, but nothing else had any appeal to me. I found the politics to not only the story be boring, but it was told in a very boring, non-engaging way. Just all around shallow characters, not much delivered to the reader. I get for its time why it was considered such an intense classic, but I don't ever have that anywhere near my top 30 fantasy stories I've read by a large margin. Red Rising is on my to be read list coming up fairly quickly. So is Broken Empire. People keep asking for Broken Empire. Jim Butcher, Dresden Files. Off the first 3 books which I've read, and apparently it gets better from there, I would say this positioning is fair. If it actually lives up to what people praise it to be. I've been disappointed by book 2, and book 3 gave me some hope for the future. I'm hoping book 4 just comes back and I really hear that rocky music coming in just all the way and the series returns to form. We have Malazan, Book of the Fallen. I know you guys want me to review more Malazan. I will once I have a little more free time. Those books are so dense and so crazy with their world building. I literally need to take notes while I go through them because I want to not be mistaken and handle them well. So I will be getting to those more once I have more time in the future and I can re-immerse myself in the world completely. And between reading books, I wanted to knock out a bunch of smaller series that I could just get under my belt before I dove back into this Goliath. It will be happening. Now, next up at number 11, we have The Wheel of Time. It's outside of the top 10. It's okay. This is okay. I just want you to note that according to r/fantasy, everything above the 11th place is better than Wheel of Time. Okay, hopefully once the adaptation comes out and Amazon does us justice, hoping we're not going the Dark Tower route, hoping we go, Game of Thrones route in terms of success. Maybe this will shoot to its rightful position. I'll stop talking about Wheel of Time now. Moving on, at number 10 we have Discworld, and while I personally was not in love with Discworld, I get it, and I did think it was a lot of fun. I can see where the level of love comes from, especially with the author being such a apparently amazing guy, which does increase my enjoyment. If I'm reading something and I know the person who wrote it is a wonderful person, it's all around better experience. Next up at number 9 we have Gentlemen Bastards, which I would put in my top 10. By no stretch of the imagination do I find this to be one of the, all-time, most great worlds or anything like that. I just found Gentlemen Bastards to stick out with character and a couple particular relationships, unique setting, and very interesting plot. So those things had it kind of pushing into my top 10, but now with a couple more series under my belt, Gentlemen Bastards could have easily fallen out, but I need to sit down and rethink that as a whole. Now we have Realm of the Elderlings, which I've not read, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, which deserves to be in the top 10. I'm glad the bandwagon hate for Harry Potter has not overtaken the r/fantasy subreddit. Now we have Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I would put a little lower. I think Era 2 knocks it down for me a little bit. I just didn't love a lot of the stuff that happened here for Mistborn. In that second story, it felt simpler, except for kind of making the magic system a bit more interesting. It honestly just felt like he was going for just a less complex story. And you could tell he wasn't trying to do this grand fantasy epic. He wanted more of a shoot-bang Western situation. And that just didn't appeal to me. So for that reason, it's down quite a bit. It's still Brandon Sanderson writing, so it's still very, very good. First Law by Joe Abercrombie. I like this positioning. First Law belongs right about here. It's absolutely stellar books. The most complex character in fantasy, in my opinion, is Glotka. I can't imagine many people arguing with that claim after reading those books. In terms of a monstrous person who you somehow love, Glotka is exactly that. Number 4, we have the Stormlight Archive. A bold positioning for r/fantasy to put for an unfinished series. When I'm talking my personal lists, I put Stormlight pretty high, but that's because it's just it's my opinion. This putting an unfinished series so high is a bit shocking to me. I thought more people might be a little hesitant. I'm not sure if I like it more or less that they weren't. It earns a good spot, and Stormlight Archive is without a doubt, one of the best fantasy stories currently being told. Number 3, we have King Killer Chronicles. Okay. Number 2, we have the Middle-earth universe, George R. Tolkien, which, you know, a solid number 2, number 1 is what it earns on every list, and Middle-earth will stay at that position for the foreseeable future. I almost always think if we're going for like influence and impact on the genre, put Middle-earth at number 1. But in terms of personal preference, which is this list is generated off a ton of people's personal preference, it can fall anywhere. At number 1, we have George R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire, aka Game of Thrones, because the show has made everyone, including myself, start referring to it as that because it's just how the brain works. I'm fine with Game of Thrones being at number 1 in lists like this because it did something very new for the genre. It's shaken up the fantasy direction as a whole. You're now veering towards grimdark being the popular perception of fantasy, which for better or worse, it comes down to personal preference. But overall, a neat list, and some of the real changes like Wheel of Time dropping a disgusting amount and seeing a couple Brandon novels take leaps as well was well worth seeing, and just giving it a once glance over. There seems to be some pretty drastic shifts every year for this list, which I like. I like seeing kind of the current, take. Top newcomers this year. I want to go over this comment because this has some of the most interesting information here as well. We have the Chekhoi Files. I messed up that. By Daniel O'Malley. Okay, got my name. I like it. Ash and Sand by Richard Neal. Nevernight Chronicles by Jay Kristoff. A Land Fit for Heroes by Richard K. Morgan. Empires of Dust by Anna Smith Spark. Let me know if any of you guys have read any of those newcomers and if they're worth me picking up, because I'd love to know your thoughts on if I should get into it or not. Series with the biggest rank jumps. Guns of Dawn. And again, for these, let me know if you've read them, what you think. I'd like to hear your little mini reviews in the comments down below. Guns of Dawn by Adrian Tifkovsky. Chronicles of the Black Gate by Philip Tucker. The Machineries of Empire by Yoon Han Lee. Oxford Time Travel by Connie Willis. Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. The Band by Nicholas Ernest. Valdemir by Mercedes Leckie. Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Arcane Ascension by Andrew Rowe. So that's an interesting, that's just some interesting names on there. Obviously, I've already read Watchmen, so you don't need to give me a review of that. Or if you want to, go ahead down there and I'll read your review and let me know what I think of it. That is r/Fantasy's top fantasy right now of 2018. What did you guys think of their list? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you going to vote in their next year's list? Probably will. I forgot to this year, but I will next year. And let me know what you think. Comment down below. What's your top 10 as well? Let me know any of those books. If I must read them, should go up on my to be read list. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a great one, y'all. Peace.